follow that one. Let's try. I'm going to say a word. No, I'm going to read the scripture first. We're reading from Luke, and we are meeting Jesus and his disciples in the synagogue. So let us listen to what the scripture has for us to hear today. Now, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on one of those days and be cured." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrite! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. The word of the Lord. Now I'm going to give you a word, and I want you to sit with that word, and I want you to notice what emotions come up, what images come up, what feelings. When I say the word freedom, if I personified freedom, I would think that freedom wants to be very simple. Freedom wants to be clear and accessible for everyone. But I'm not a mind reader, but I'm pretty sure we did not all have the same idea of what freedom was. Freedom wants to be simple, but in practice, freedom is very complicated. But I bet it also sits pretty high on all of our value systems. Not just because of the country we live in, but because this book is filled with stories about freedom and adding free things into people's lives to open up the expanses of God's good gifts. So not just because it is a word we value in our country, but because it is something central to this book and to the message of Jesus. So we have to realize and wrestle with what freedom is. Now today's story about Jesus is freeing a woman from a physical disability. And Jesus sees her across the way, and he sees that there is a problem with how she is able to interact with the space that she is in. She's limited in access to things like the pools of water to do the ritual washings and the altar and the Pharisees and the priests around her. Most people are sitting on mats. That's probably a hard thing for her to do. And all the spaces that she could lean up against to get relief from the pain are taken by other people. The paths to these important points around the synagogue are crowded with people. So she has to walk out of her way on a longer path to get to where she's going. Even outside of these walls, her life has been limited. She probably hasn't found a good match for marriage. She probably doesn't have a great paying, supporting job. She's probably looked down on. She has limits to who she can be in her world because of this physical disability. And so Jesus sees this and sees her as an opportunity to show everyone else what they're missing in this moment. He walks over to her, lays his hands on her, and the pain melts away. Her muscles get stronger and the tendons tighten so she can stand up straight. Nothing has changed about her except her ability to stand up. But now, she might be able to get a match, a job. She can access the things around her much easier. Not because her personality has changed, not because her talents have changed, not because she's a better work ethic. Nothing about her has changed except for her ability to stand up. Jesus is showing the people there that they have made her disabled. This is a concept that I learned probably in the last year, that communities, society, make disabilities. And it was told to me in a story. The story went like this. Imagine an island somewhere where humans all have the ability to fly, not because they have airplanes or other mechanics on them. They can naturally fly. They're going to build their world and their cities and their towns in a very specific way because they don't need cars, so there won't be any need for roads. Probably phone lines are under the ground because that's a flying hazard. And doors don't have to be on the first floor. Architects can get creative and think about all these amazing different ways to enter a building, from the roof, from the 5th floor. Their world looks very different than ours. And if you or I were to move onto this island, we would suddenly be disabled. Not because of anything has changed about us, but because of where we are. There wouldn't be roads that we need to drive on to get to places. We'd have to have people come out and lift us into buildings to try to access those doors that are higher up. If we lived in this community long enough, they might make us some roads, some elevators, some ramps to get up or stairs to get up to those other doors. But there will always be places that we cannot access because we are not in the majority of able-bodied people. Now, when I heard that story, I was like, okay, I don't know. It took me a long time to start to notice how we do this in our world. And I had a conversation with a friend like before I heard this story, but it popped into my head after it. And it was a friend of mine named Darren, and he stamps his money with Braille. So he is fully blind, and he was living in a community where the cashier at the local convenience store kept cheating him in his change. He would hand him a 20 and was supposed to get $15, $16 back and only get, 3 $1 bills back. And the people that were helping him that were sighted, were able to say like, hey, that's not what you're supposed to give him. And so Darren had to find a way to help himself in a world that was not going to treat him well because they saw a way to take advantage of him. And so now he has a way to tell what different paper bills are. He can scan them, and then if he's keeping it, he can stamp it with the Braille number on the paper. I was actually talking to Marcy right before this and asking if she had a system as well. And she mentioned that it's actually been said many times since the Disability Act that the United States money would put something on it to make our money accessible. It just has never happened yet. In Canada and other places, their money has different things that people can feel are different. But we don't have that yet. And it makes me wonder why. Why don't we make our money accessible? 1 second. Now, we all know disabilities are not just physical. There are financial disabilities, there are age disabilities, being treated differently for lots of different reasons that might disable or limit the way we can access things into this world. When I was a paraeducator in a first grade classroom, I worked with a student who had autism, and the parents would come in every once in a while and tell us about their weekend, and they would end the story with, "I guess we can't go back there now." Their world would get smaller and smaller and smaller. Not because anything was changing about them, but because the places they wanted or needed to go were so committed to rules and etiquette and expectations that when the child did not react in a way that that community, that business wanted, they would either straight up say, "Don't come back," or the family would get that vibe that this is no longer a space that we can go to. Life can become so limited, not because we're doing anything wrong or different, just by the things that are around us. The leaders in that synagogue were also so committed to rules and etiquette and regulations that they were uncomfortable that Jesus was healing on the Sabbath. This wasn't allowed. But Jesus was in a moment of pointing out the ridiculousness of what was going on, that there wasn't space for this woman to walk or sit or be cared for. This was another chance, and he said, "You take your donkey when it's thirsty on the Sabbath. This woman is thirsty for freedom. Why don't we offer her that?" He also reminds them that the Sabbath is there to rest from the work of Sunday through Friday. If this woman is still disabled, not because she isn't able to work, isn't able to love someone and be married, isn't able to earn a wage, she can do all of those things, but her world, her society, her community is limiting her access to those things. So if that woman still is limited and disabled, what is the community resting from? Have they done the work that they can rest? These are the hard questions that Jesus puts in front of this community by simply healing this one woman. Not because there's something wrong with her or her body that she needs to be freed from a disability. It is to show the community that a simple change of being able to stand up straight will change her life. And that's not really fair. It's not really the values that that community declares to everyone else. My favorite comic strip is of a school on a very wintry morning, and the custodian is shoveling off the stairs of the school, and there's about 30 kids gathered to get into school, to get up those stairs. And as the custodian is shoveling, a child rolls up on a wheelchair and says, "Can you shovel the ramp?" And the custodian goes, "There are 30 kids who need the stairs. I'll get to you when I get to you." And the kid goes, Well, if you shovel the ramp, we can all use it. We do this. We create more work for ourselves by not creating a world that is accessible to other people. We create systems and ways of living that we would all benefit from if we just took the time to notice how other people are being disabled. This miracle now creates a woman who has lived an experience that hopefully she'll go to them and say, hey, there's another person that's bent over. Can we make a path right here? Can you please move? Can you please give them your seat? And she can now help her community see how they disable people and help them expand the access that people have. John actually told me a story about this church and about how if we do make things accessible for other people, how it makes it better for all of us. This elevator that's out here apparently was a very difficult thing to get in. It's expensive, probably, destroyed some kind, the ambiance of the hallway. So there were active oppositions to the elevator. And then someone who was in active opposition needed a walker. So later, years later, they were like, I was on the side that did not want this elevator, but I am very happy that we have this elevator now. So this work isn't just benefiting the people who need it now, it could be benefiting us. We don't know. We don't know what systems we will need as we age or have accidents, as our children grow up. But if we can make this a world that is safe and accessible for everyone, we don't have to worry about what will happen to our bodies in the future. And a lot of these problems are inherited problems. An elevator wasn't needed at one time, and then it was expensive to put in, and so the arguments and the problems are just things that are just passed down to us. For instance, the train tracks are all exactly 4 feet, 8.5 inches from guard to rail. Seems like an arbitrary number. But that's because the machines that were making wagons were the ones that switched over to start making the train axles. And the reason the machines that were making the wagons were at 4 feet, 8.5 inches is because there were rutted roads in England that needed to be traversed when they put wagons on, so they had to make them 4 feet, 8.5 inches, because that's how the ruts were in the road already. And the ruts in the road got there because when Rome came up with their armies and their chariots wheels were 4 feet, 8.5 inches apart. The train tracks being built in 2022 are being influenced by the chariots of ancient Rome. Some of these things we just inherit, we just don't ask why, we don't ask, can it be better if we change it? Yeah, I'm not saying this is cost effective, but I am saying we have to notice the way we are enacting our values. And if we are choosing not to make our money accessible, we are valuing one experience over another and not making our world more inclusive. We do this with lots of things. We do this with clothes. Yesterday was the first time in my 36 years that I wore a crop top because I have been told that my body is not one that can wear that. We do this with all sorts of things, with clothes, with styles, with professions. We have these strange rules that maybe make sense on some level, but every once in a while we should ask, why? Why can't Jesus heal on the Sabbath? Why can't someone be freed from their limitations and given more access on God's day. If someone can't do something that they want or need to do, it is our work to carry some of that burden, some of that discomfort, because they are always uncomfortable. They're always having to buy extra devices so they can mark their money. Marcy had to print out her liturgy in a different way. All these extra things that people have to do that if we were a little more uncomfortable, we might be able to make their lives a little bit easier. And by making their lives easier, maybe one day we realize we made our lives easier with an elevator or accessible money or taking the risk to wear clothes that we've been told are wrong. Freedom is not always comfortable. Freedom can be uncomfortable, and it is worth it, and may we find our ways to work a little bit more discomfort for others. Thanks be to God.